Alright, in this video I'm going to be going over the replacement and where to purchase a carburetor for this particular tiller. This is a Craftsman 18-inch rear tine tiller with a 208cc engine. Now this tiller is not made by Craftsman, it's a MTD product. There's also a Cub Cadet tiller that's identically the same as this one, and it may be under some different brands like Troy-Bilt as well, which is also part of the MTT brand. They also made a rear tine tiller for Lowe's at one point. Yes, Lowe's a long time ago actually had their own brand of things like lawnmowers and yard equipment, which was, I believe, made by MTD as well. Now, I'll have a link in the description where to get the carburetor. This is the one. This is actually the OEM carburetor. Now, it's not made by MTD. I believe the engine that come on these things is actually like a Chinese style engine. It's just generic. They just throw a name on there. So it says Craftsman 208cc. Craftsman didn't make the engine. I don't think MTD did either. This is the actual brand of carburetor that's on here. It was exactly $20 on Amazon. It comes with gaskets. This is a much better way to purchase it, because if you go to say like Troy-Bilt or you go to one of the repair websites, you will end up paying over $100 to get a, say, like a Troy-Bilt listed or whatever carburetor when they're not even the carburetor manufacturer anyway. So anyway, 20 bucks. It comes with the gaskets. Great deal. This tiller is 10 years old. It starts fine, but it's had some rough running issues, especially at full throttle. It wants some choke to keep it from popping like it's running too lean. So that's why we're going to place the carburetor on here, and I'll walk you through that. So we'll try to do it step by step so it doesn't make the video too long. So obviously the first thing we're going to want to do is take your air cleaner assembly, which of course could vary a little bit based on year to year is our model. Basically, we're going to take our air cleaner off, air filter, and then what we're going to do, we have these two nuts here. We're going to remove those, and I'll let you know the size once I get those removed. Alright, so those two nuts on the right there, these are just 10 millimeter. So I removed them with the 10 millimeter socket. Now, depending on your year, this one actually has a charcoal canister on it like a car to get some of the fuel vapors. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to work, it's clipped down with these two little clips on the side, and it pulls out, but there are fuel tubes underneath here I'm going to have to disconnect. Once I get those disconnected, I'll show you what they look like so you have an idea. Alright, so this is our charcoal canister, and it should move. Let me show you. There was actually two fuel lines. The vapor lines I disconnected. One small one, this one over here wasn't used, and it sits in there in this direction. So those are your two lines right there. Little clips, remove those. That one and that one. This goes from your fuel tank, which this one's actually torn out. All this is correct some of the vapors from the fuel tank toward this charcoal canister, and those vapors get burned. It helps with emissions, and this is going to your carburetor system. So, all right, next step is we're going to try to wiggle this thing off, and I'll let y'all know how it goes and show you any tips as I learn to remove this. Directly under your air cleaner, you'll see there's a Phillips screw in there, directly underneath your air cleaner, so we need to remove that. That's the next thing to remove. And there's actually two of them. There's one on the right and the left. So if your hand's really dirty, these may be covered with dirt, but two Phillips screws to remove underneath your air cleaner assembly, and this piece should slide right on off after that. Alright, so like I said, I would show y'all tips. This whole assembly comes off. There is your evaporator system, so we can actually go ahead and cadet this back later. You actually do not need to remove the charcoal canister thing because it runs directly to the air cleaner assembly. Those two Phillips screws will come off as one piece. So quick tip, save you a little bit of time. So now what we're going to do is we're going to pull this. Should basically, with some pressure, we're going to get this off. Now, the next thing you're going to want to remove is this nut right here, which is probably 10 millimeter. Of course, I'll let y'all know what it is. So this bracket is connected to this air cleaner, as you can see. So we're going to remove that nut, and hopefully that'll be the last thing we have to remove. This thing is pretty darn secure. So we also have a breather hose that's attached to the valve cover. It goes to this air cleaner. It's going to be easier because it's easier to access to just go ahead and loosen this clip it, and pull it off than trying to get it off of here. Now that is the last thing we need to remove, it appears, to get the cover off the carburetor. Of course, I'm going to walk you through how to reassemble this and put it back together, and not just tell you reverse of disassembly. I believe in showing people how to put it back together as well. So now we're looking at our carburetor. Now, of course, we're going to have gaskets. Now, this carburetor, the replacement did come with gaskets, and of course, we're going to compare those gaskets with the ones that are existing to make sure we match them up. But now here's our next dilemma. My fuel tank is full, unfortunately. If you had an empty fuel tank, this would not even be something you have to worry about. But I have two choices. I need to disconnect this fuel line. If I disconnect it from this tank, it's unfortunately going to drain all that fuel out. But what I can do is still going to make a mess, is disconnect this fuel line from the carburetor, then route that fuel line, point it up, and hopefully I'll keep the fuel from spilling out. So the next step is to remove your fuel line. And if your fuel tank's empty, this is not something that's going to be much of a mess. But if your fuel tank is full or has fuel in it, like mine does, it's going to be a little messy. So that's what I'm going to do next, is remove the fuel line from the carburetor, point in upwards directions, and I'll plug it with something if necessary. I'll let you know how it goes. So I told you it would make a mess, and it did, and that's completely my fault for having a fuel tank full of fuel. So what I did is I put a bolt I had in it, a bolt. I just put a bolt down in there and put the hose clamp back on it. Keep that. You can see it's wet with fuel. It spilled some. So one thing I've noticed about my carburetor, once again, your model could vary. I mean, they made these tillers over decades. I have a hard gasket. I mean hard, I mean like a permanent gasket. This is not like felt or rubber. This is a piece of plastic, machined piece of plastic that's going between the air cleaner and carburetor. So I'm just going to reuse this. I'm only going to put gaskets in places that there were gaskets on it from original. So hold on to this. If yours has this, is a hard gasket, as you can tell. I don't mean hard like old. I mean like it's a permanent style seal that's mounted between the carburetor and the base of the air cleaner. So we're going to hold on to that. Of course, wipe all the dirt off of it. So the next step, now we're actually going to be able to remove this darn carburetor. So let's look down. Now you're going to have a rod. That's your throttle rod. Well, actually, that's not throttle rod. The throttle rod is right here. So it's basically like a governor style system. And this adjustment is basically just moving the spring back and forth that controls, ends up controlling this when it's running. So what we're going to do is we're going to push this throttle all the way back. You see this little indentation. You see this little indentation right here? We're going to push this throttle all the way back. And when that's straight, we're going to be able to lift this rod out. And I'll show you after it's lifted out. But push it all the way back so it's basically vertical, and you'll be able to lift this rod out when they line up with one another. And of course, be careful with this little spring. You see this little spring that's clipped in right here? Take some useless pliers and be real careful with moving that spring outside that hole. Of course, I'll show you it once I get it removed. Alright, so that was real easy. It literally just pulls right out. There's that rod, and there's that little spring guy. And of course, you see the holes. That hole is for your little baby spring, and that hole down in there, you'll be able to see it in person really well. You can see it now. You can see the ground through it, actually, is where that rod goes in. So now let's pull this carburetor off and compare the gaskets. And let's get this dang thing replaced. Alright, so as you can see, the carburetor is now off. Now, I told y'all it's the same model. I wouldn't lie to you. There's the brand right there. Now, the model number is completely worn away. The exact same brand, looks the exact same as the carburetor, all for $20. It comes with 3 gaskets. Could come from different gaskets for different machining based on whether there's gaskets. But there's the original gasket that was connected to the engine. So there's only 1 gasket on here that's replaceable, and really, like I said, it comes with 3. So what we're going to do, I'm going to take this gasket off, and I'm going to open my little baggie up, and I'm going to compare it and match it with this one, and put that new gasket on first, and then we'll slide the new carburetor on, and we'll start doing a reassembly process, which hopefully will go well. Alright guys, this is something I've learned sometimes when buying parts, is sometimes your factory gaskets are just better. So this is your factory gasket that was on there. It's not torn. I was, careful with it like I always am. And this is different gaskets it comes with. and they're thinner, and none of them match up perfectly. This is the closest one. So what I'm actually gonna do, I've cleaned off the old gasket, some of the dirt and stuff off of it, and I'm just going to gently put it back on. All right, so now we're about to put the carburetor back together. This is our new one, and it does come with a new choke lever as well. So you do get a new choke lever with it. So we're going to put this on, and even the choke lever parts have the exact same number on them, HV015. So that's great. So what we're going to do is put our carburetor back on. It's pretty obvious which direction it goes on based on where your fuel line hookup was. So we're comparing. Fuel lines are identical. I haven't put the choke lever on. Things on top look the same. So what we're going to do, we're going to take this guy and slide it on there. So now that our one is slid on here, what we're going to want to do next is pretty simple. And that is we want to reconnect our rods. So that's what we're going to do. So we're going to take this rod and this spring, and we're going to put them back in the holes on top. All right, that was super easy. The rod dropped right in, the spring went right back in the hole. No issue. You can see them right there moving with it. Next thing we should do, which is going to be messy again, it's like this fuel's going to spill in. I need to reconnect the fuel line. After we reconnect the fuel line, we'll go ahead and put this new choke lever on top of it. And while we're here, we might as well go ahead and do this. I still want to clean this off. This is our gasket that it came with, original part. Put that back on for which side of air cleaner assembly on. So fuel line next, then choke. All right, so fuel line is back on. A little bit of a mess. Now our new choke handle, see this little stud? It comes out. He drops on that stud, and that pin, that little pin, is the pivot. Well, this is the pivot. The pin goes in here, and that's actually what moves our choke. So just like that, goes in place. Voila, choke lever. There's your choke right there. That's it. So that's in place. Next step is for me to go clean this gasket. But basically, you're going to slide it on, of course, line up with what looks correct on here. So look at your carburetor. So and make sure, you know, based on whichever design you have, like that's obviously wrong. So it'd be the other way around. Just make sure you put everything back together in the correct order. All right, so I'll clean that up, get that on, and then we'll slide our first part of our airbox assembly back on. Now, I did notice one of our gaskets that it came with actually fits perfectly. It matches up with this one, and this had some rubber on it that started to flake away as a factory seal. So I did go ahead and use that gasket because it actually lines up perfectly. And I'm just going to put this other one over it. There was rubber on it that helped seal it, and some of the rubber started to flake away. So I said, well, you know, if they line up perfectly, it's not blocking anything. Why not give it some extra protection? So this is our airbox assembly, the first part of it. And this is what's going to slide over our two studs. And of course, remember, we got this. We got to connect back to that valve cover. It's basically a vent. And you got these little rods in here, little pins that slide. They may push in and out. They're basically sleeves that slide over these studs. So we have to push them back in this little thing because they may want to push out and they'll be hanging out the back. You can just kind of push them back flush. So put our choke lever a little bit towards back, and we're just going to slide that on over. And yeah, we're going to get that hose on to push it on, and then the studs should be poking through, and then we'll go ahead and get this reassembled to everything, tighten back down. Now remember, we got that nut that goes in through here that we need to put in 10 millimeter, and then we'll do our studs. We want to get that in. I'm going to get that in first. All right, so our bolt is back in. We're going to take our two nuts, screw those on, and we'll tighten down, and I'll get this push back nice and firm. All right, so that's back in. What you want to do when you tighten down, just slowly tighten it down back and forth a little bit on each side, get it snug down evenly. That way it's not cockeyed or whatever, and just snug them down nice and tight. Then what we're going to do next is, because I had disconnected it, is I'm going to reconnect this charcoal canister to these hoses, clip it back in here, and we'll be able to drop this on here to get those Phillips screws in. Alright, so one of the things I know I'm going to have to get for this thing, it's not going to affect it running, it's just for emissions, is this little hose up here is torn, so I'm going to have to replace this line at some point. I just don't have any line right now with me, any hose to replace that little guy because it does have a tear in it. So, but anyway, that's not what the video is about. So like I said, we got our cover, it drops back on. Remember, we got our 2 Phillips screws that go down in those holes, so we'll get our screws in, and then the only thing left, we'll be able to put our air cleaner back on, we'll be able to start it up. Alright, our screws are in, so we get our air cleaner back on, which this one's still in really good shape. If you take that foam off, it's still really good. So we'll take our air cleaner, which right there, and we'll take our little cover guy once again. Alright, now to see if it starts. So full throttle, we'll apply the choke, and I didn't put any pour up on this thing. It's getting a little short. I've repaired it. Anyway, see if it runs, and we really want to see how it runs at full throttle, because that was a problem before. It would pop a lot unless there was some choke applied. Yeah, so it runs pretty good. Let's do that. So it ran pretty good. So that runs better for sure. The other one had a lot of pop in at full throttle, just pop, 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 unless you applied like at least half the choke on it until after like 30 minutes running. Even sometimes then you'd have to run it with some choke because it was just popping, which probably it was running lean. It wasn't getting enough fuel because there was some clogging up in the carburetor, which kind of makes sense. I mean, I had it for 10 years, and actually when I had got it, it was discounted by like 150 bucks. Some old fuel, I think, had someone had used it, didn't like it, returned it, and they cleaned it up, and the old fuel sat in it. And so, but like I said, this is right at $20, literally for the exact same carburetor that it came with. You can't beat it. Well worth doing. And you know, I kind of walked you through how to replace it, remove it. I have a link in the description where to buy it. I did not take this apart before I made the video, so I was learning with y'all. So hopefully this helps someone, helps them, you know, fix their tiller, whether it's a Craftsman Tiller or a Cub Cadet, one of these 2HCC rear tine 18-inch tillers. And I'll put the part in the description. And until next time, guys, I hope y'all have a good day.